On, you're good to go.
All right, 3, 2, and 1. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Scoop Rewind podcast brought to you by PPG. Tonight, looking at a closer look at Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final in 2009, Pens and the Detroit Red Wings. The cast of characters remaining the same. Michelle Crecchiolo, Paul Steigerwald, Sam Kassan. We all have lower thirds. We all have our faces. We're moving ahead with the times. And guys, Penguins trying to keep the momentum going there from Game 3 to Game 4, something they were not able to do the year before when they played the Red Wings in 2008, and Detroit took a 3-1 lead in game number 4.
Yeah, they really needed to flip the script this time around. You look back, you kind of saw history repeating itself. The 2008 series, the Red Wings obviously defended home ice, won the first two. Pittsburgh defended home ice in Game 3, but really the pivotal moment was they lost that Game 4. Put them way behind the 8 ball. Then you're asking yourself, you have to beat Detroit 3 times in a row, which is a tall task. Even though they almost, came inches shy in that Game 6, but it really came down to this Game 4 and the Penguins flipping it. They gave themselves a fighting chance with that Game 3 victory, but if they really had any aspirations of winning the Stanley Cup, they had to win this Game 4.
And not an easy thing to do, when you're in a situation where you go home. A lot of times the visiting team is thinking, if we just get a split here, we'll be in good shape in the playoffs. That's what the Penguins were thinking when they went into Detroit for the first two games. But even though they played well, they came up empty. So they really put themselves in a tough situation going home. But clearly, they gained a lot of confidence from what they did in Game 3. Even though there was a big storm that they had to weather in the first period of Game 4, clearly you could see that the Penguins were gaining confidence and believing that if they kept playing their game, they'd have a chance to win.
It just goes off to what we've been talking about so much with experience is that, just reading the comments from the players after Game 3, just they saying how they knew how big Game 4 is now because of losing it last year. And it's just amazing. You go through it one time and you just immediately have this foundation to build off of. So I think that was hugely helpful for the guys that had been in the locker room with the Penguins the year before.
Is there any reason why you're wearing red today, Michelle? Or?
I was wondering if you guys were going to notice, which how could you not? I mean, but I figured, with this being the first video recording of this podcast, I had to represent my Red Wings because I'm not going to lie, you guys, it is kind of tough to go back and revisit these losses for the team I grew up cheering for. So this is my way of showing support to that Red Wings team by wearing red.
Well, Mish, were you confident going into Game 4? I mean, where was your head at as a Red Wings fan? Because obviously it was pretty much went the same track as far as 2008, but it had a different feel to it, I'd say, in the first 3 games.
Yeah, well, I think, Staggy, you've actually touched on this a couple times, but you just look at the statistics and the numbers of a team that wins the first 2 games of a series, that, things are usually going to tilt in their favor. And I think, with it having followed that same script up to this point, I think everyone in Detroit felt pretty good, especially too with, the young guys that have been stepping up. Like, I mentioned Justin Abdelkader in the first couple games, and, Darren Helm is someone who got in the scoreboard in this game for the Red Wings, things like that. So I think in Detroit, we were feeling pretty good because history, I think, was on our side.
When you think about the onslaught, as Staggy described it, that Detroit had in the first period, all came after the fact that the Penguins did carry some of that momentum over from Game 3 to Game 4. And I know that's a taboo subject in the playoffs. We never talk about there being momentum from one game to the next. But I think it's fair to say there was, and there was a ton of confidence all playoffs from Evgeny Malkin. He draws that penalty 1:12 in. And then, ironically enough, I don't know what you guys thought, looking back on it and seeing the replay, the end wall, the backboards with a weird bounce at Mellon Arena, not at Joe Louis Arena, off a shot right to Gino, and he puts it in.
Yeah, and boy, I'll tell you, the Penguins' power play was a huge factor in this series. And when Gino scored that goal, if I'm not mistaken, they were then 4 for 7 on the power play in the series. That's outrageous. If you can score like that on the power play in the Stanley Cup Final, you got a good chance of winning. You talk about special teams and goaltending. And, of course, this game was a total special teams victory for the Penguins. We'll get into that later, but it started with the power play goal by Gino and got the place rocking again. And, yes, it was a carryover momentum-wise from Game 3 to Game 4. And, it had to have the Red Wings wondering what they had to do to stop the Penguins' power play because it was spectacular. And I just keep pointing to Sergei Gonchar. I mean, that guy was so great on the power play. He was the reason. He's the quarterback. He lugged the puck. He was brilliant at straddling the blue line with it. Knew just when to move the puck. It was really fun to watch him, basically putting on a clinic on how to run a power play.
You talk about, again, Malkin, I'll throw a little red meat to Mish here in a second. Considering that really Malkin initiated the contact and then it was the penalty that went against him. But beside the point, there probably should have been a penalty called seconds earlier on Gino anyway, that the Penguins should have got a power play. So it kind of evened out that they did get the power play. But Malkin draws the penalty. He wins a wall battle. So before he even gets there, he wins the wall battle, sets up Stahl in the slot. And as this play is going, he circles around the net and just kind of gets in the blue paint area. And then the alertness, because that puck came firing off the boards, for him to track it, locate it, and get that quick snapshot. And then I think he was mid-celebration before Chris Osgood even knew the puck was in the net, because Osgood was jumping back and the puck was already over the line. Gino's throwing his arms and Osgood's looking over his shoulder. Like, I swear Malkin was like mid-celebration before Osgood even knew the puck was in. I mean, that just shows you the intelligence. Also, like I said, he started the play by drawing the penalty, wins the puck battle, sets up Stahl in the slot, then goes around the net and gets the errant shot from Chris Letang to bat it in. Just an overall Evgeny Malkin just taking over on that play.
Well, I know I had to definitely watch a couple times before I knew it was in, and I knew it was coming. I mean, it was that quick that it happened. But it's funny, Sam, you posted on the Penguins website today, in your what to watch for this game, you put Evgeny Malkin drew an early power play for the Penguins. Did he initiate the contact? Yes. Did he get a favorable goal? Yes. Were the Penguins complaining? Nope. And I just wrote, come on. But you guys, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this, but I think, us going back and rewatching this is bringing up a lot. Obviously, we're discussing it, but I think, it stood out to me the most rewatching this series is just how dominant Gino was in every sense. I mean, he was just so consistently a factor in every facet. I mean, I think we talk about the series against Carolina as being his best, and rightfully so, but I mean, I feel like he was just all over the place in this series too, just truly putting the Penguins on his back in every regard.
I agree, and I thought he was playing a very smart game too. If you watch him, he was not turning pucks over or forcing offense a whole lot. He seemed to be really thinking out there. The wheels were turning in his head, which I think is an indication that he's really capable of doing that. We've seen him kind of revert to that mode more this season after the long talk he had with Mike Sullivan and stuff. But I think he's kind of gained a reputation of being kind of not very good at puck management. Let's put it that way. But I thought he did a really good job in this game in particular. He was good in that area. He wasn't really forcing offense or turning pucks over. Seemed to be able to slow the pace down in his head and physically slow it down to a way where he could really be effective.
Well, people might forget too that 08-09, obviously Evgeny Malkin won the scoring title that year. He also won the playoff MVP for a reason, but people forget he also led the league in takeaways. So he was scoring a ton of points in the regular season, but he led the league during that year in takeaways because he was so good defensively then. And, maybe he's put less emphasis or less concentration on that as his career's gone. But as Staggy just mentioned, it seems like he re-emphasized that more this season than any point since then. And he was a dominant force both in the defensive zone and the offensive zone. I mean, he was a monster, really. Nobody could really handle him. I mean, if they're as a defensive player, he's stealing the puck from you. He's all in your face. He's got that long reach and that stick. He's getting that stick in lanes, and he was intercepting passes left and right. Even in this game, he intercepts a pass and goes on a breakaway as time is expiring in a period. But I think people tend to forget how good defensively he was in those early couple of years, especially that entire 08-09 season. And I think a lot of that carried over in the playoffs and led a lot to his offensive success.
Reminds me, Sam, long time ago when Scotty Bowman was coaching the Penguins, he said to me one day, offensive players can be really good defensive players because they're good at stripping the puck from the opposition. I thought that was a thing I never forgot when he told me that. I think of Mario in that regard, but they're really skilled players. And you look at Pavel Datsyuk, who was not playing in this series at this point. He's a master at the same things. He was known for his defensive play, his ability to strip the puck from people. So it's using the skill, the offensive stick skills that a player has to be a good defensive player. And that's exactly what Malkin was throughout that playoff run.
He's just a true genetic specimen. I actually had the chance to sit in the stands for the Penguins' 600th sellout earlier this year when the Penguins played Boston in that comeback game. And I actually had an entire row of Bruins fans behind me It was just so funny because the entire time, all they could talk about was how they couldn't get over how big Gino was. Like seeing him, that close and in person, there's like, my God, Malkin, he's a beast. Like, look how big he is. Like, they could not get over it. So I think, something when he's at his best, he's using that size, he's using everything you guys just mentioned, and he truly did that in the series for sure.
You know what else I thought was cool? I don't know if you guys noticed this, Josh, but I noticed after he'd gotten in that fight at the end of game 2, or in game 2, that when there was a whistle or whatever, he would wade in to see if he could draw a penalty. It wasn't like he was going in there to initiate. He was kind of backing in and looking like he was just sort of arriving there, you know what I mean? But he knew that if he went there, somebody was going to engage him. And so he was sort of kind of to draw the attention of the Red Wings to take a penalty. But I mean, that's what I mean about him being really thinking in these games. He wasn't just playing sheerly on instinct. He seemed to be really using his brain a lot out there.
I think also one thing that jumped out to me, not just in game 4, and I know we'll get to it very soon when we talk about this game, but he was killing penalties. When's the last time you remember Gino killing penalties? Kind of to your point, Sam, about his defensive style and his game, and maybe that being a little underlooked. I don't remember since I've come to the Penguins of Evgeny Malkin's taking one shift on the penalty kill. I would bet that he is not in those 5-6 seasons. But there he is out there in game 4 of the Stanley Cup final. I mean, I think it speaks to how much the coaching staff trusted him, what he had established as far as his overall play, and then obviously what he had been evolved into from that whole playoff run as far as the complete player aspect.
Well, he was a penalty killer when he played in Russia. I mean, he had a lot of experience at it. In fact, when he came over, people talked about it. But the big thing was, you didn't want to have your offensive players overtaxed. So that was kind of the thinking. And that's why, you haven't seen Sid do it. Plus, you don't want to put guys in positions to be blocking shots and getting hurt. It seems like.
But that team had some great killers, some great natural killers. That's what I'm saying. You have him out there. That kind of speaks to where he was at, right?
Now, when he got the breakaway, that led to ultimately to the shorthanded goal. That was in a 4-on-4 situation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So
he was in the box. It was 5-on-3 for
right. He was in the box and he came out.
He came out, yeah.
He came out. Okay, got it. And when he came out, did it ever 5-on-3 ended? So what was it at that point when Malkin drew that penalty? Was he a penalty killer or was it a 4-on-4 situation?
Second period? I don't think he
We're getting ahead here, but we'll get to it later. But that was one time where when I saw the highlights the first time, then I went back and looked at the game. When I looked at the highlights, I thought he was in a penalty killing mode. But when I watched the game, we can check it again later. But I thought it was a 4-on-4.
Yeah, that was a. Orpik took a penalty. Malkin took a penalty. Then with 2 seconds left, Orpik took a penalty. So Malkin came out of the box. So it was a 5-on-3 for 2 seconds. So Malkin came out of the box, intercepted the pass, went in on his opportunity, and then saw literally on the.
Thanks for clarifying that. So he was in a penalty killing mode, but I don't think he would necessarily have been a penalty killer. It's just happened that he came out of the box.
Well, that's fair. I'm just pointing to the grand scope of the series that he was featured on the penalty kill in the games.
Yes.
If you watch the full games, you'll see that he was on the kill a few times.
Which is awesome. And that's a great observation.
Well, in any event, I thought it was interesting. We mentioned all the shots and all the opportunities for Detroit. You look at the first period, 30 shots on goal in total. Detroit had 19 of them. Eddie Olczyk said on the broadcast that he felt that the game 4 was the tightest checked game of the first 4 in that first period. Curious for your guys' perspective on that, because when you see 30 shots, I think your initial thought, if you're not necessarily paying attention to the details within the game, is probably pretty wide open. There's probably a lot of offensive opportunities. Can it be both? Can it be tight checking with opportunities to be had at both ends?
Well, I think most of the opportunities, if you go back, the grade A opportunities, I don't think were there. Tracking, and I know there was a sequence halfway through the first where Fleury had to make a couple saves, stopped, I believe it was Helm, and then Cleary twice from point blank. But and then obviously the Detroit gets the goal late in the period on a bad giveaway by Rob Scuderi, which is very uncharacteristic of him during that playoff series. But I thought a lot of the opportunities were more on the perimeter, just putting the puck on net. And it was pretty tight. But what you notice too, when they would put the puck on net, you create these rebounds, and the best opportunities came off of some of those rebound plays. Like I said, Dan Cleary got 2-point blank opportunities after Darren Helm just sends what seems like a harmless shot on net. So the shots may have been pretty high. I thought it was overall tight, but I do think I agree with you, Josh. It was tight, but there was also some opportunities. It wasn't like it was a 0-0 defensive struggle where no one could get anything going.
Yeah, I would.
Helm and McCleary, they were dangerous that entire game, really. But in the first period, great chances. They were younger players with really good legs, and they were really, I thought, among the better players for the Red Wings in those 2 games in Pittsburgh.
You mentioned that sequence, talking about Cleary and Helm, and I got to say, it's interesting for me to go back to this because I think this is where I really started to dislike Marc-Andre Fleury, which now, going back, I think we can all agree is probably one of our favorite human beings of all time. But this is where I felt like he just was locked in. Like, I think in the other games, there were times he looked frantic, chaotic. But I think, at this point, this, sequence here, where the Red Wings were getting a lot of shots, quality and not quality, but he was still strong. And I think that's where, I don't know, he just turned a corner, I think, in being that solid brick wall back there for the Penguins. And I'm curious as to what, when Staggy, you and Sam think about just the criticism he had been facing going into that game and just how he responded to it with the way he played, just weathering the storm there for stretches against the Red Wings when they tried to respond after the Penguins scored.
I thought he looked awesome, and he looked really under control. He didn't look like he was flailing around too much. I thought his game was really kind of tight in the crease, and he's good on the posts, and he was playing in a way that I thought he played. Remember, he went through those tough years after the Penguins won the Cup in 2009, where he seemed to lose some of his game when Thomas Vokoun had to play in place of him and so on. But he was looking very under control, I thought, in this game, just as he had in Game 3. So that was important because obviously they had 19 shots in the first period. I mean, he had to make a lot of saves. Cleary and Helm were 2 of the more dangerous guys, but everybody seemed to be causing problems. I don't know how many different guys had shots in that period, but anytime any team gets 19 shots, your goaltender had to really stand on his head.
I think what really stood out to me, it kind of reminds me of you guys remember when Matt Murray was going in the 16 and 17 final where he would go and maybe the opponent would get a second goal on him early in the second period, but you knew that was it. You knew he was going to shut the door and just slam it shut, and there was nothing else he was going to give. Or maybe he gives up a bad goal, in the early in the third period, but then from there he's going to make every save that you need. That kind of is what it reminds me of when that goaltender, because he gave up. If you look at even Game 3, gives up the second goal fairly early, and then Detroit never gets another goal. And in this game, Detroit takes the lead 2-1, just 50 whatever odd seconds it is into the 46 seconds into the second period. Detroit takes the lead 2-1, but at the time there's 40 minutes of hockey still to play. Now we look back and say, man, he slammed the door shut. But at the time, you kind of had that feeling like he was going to do that. It was kind of a tough goal to give up. I know there was a double screen, both, by the way, Penguin players, double screening their own goaltender. So a tough goal to give up, but you kind of had that feeling the way he was riding then that he was going to slam the door shut. And I think the thing with Fleury at that time was he seemed to be a different goaltender at home and on the road. So on the road, he seemed a little more frantic, a little more, I don't know, he could get off his game a little more. Where at home, he seemed much more confident, much more poised, much more shut down. So at home, I think there was that feeling, certainly. And then on the road, he could have his shaky moments at times. Sometimes he'd be good, sometimes he'd be bad. It depended. He was kind of a roller coaster on the road, as we'll talk about when we get to Game 5. But sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. But I think at home, through that entire playoff run, he was excellent. And I think that was part of the reason why.
Boy, he certainly had a lot of traffic in front of him. I mean, Holmstrom and also the mule, Von Franzen, was in front of him a lot. So he had more to think about than just the puck. And the Red Wings were pretty good at getting pucks to the point and getting shots through. I was impressed with their ability to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons why they had 19 shots. I mean, they were getting shots from all over the place. And Fleury had to deal with a lot of that traffic in front of him. So I thought he did a really good job of maintaining his focus because, it seemed like every time you looked up, there was somebody practically leaning on him, and he had to kind of fight that off to be able to see the puck.
Detroit did get on the board late in the first period. I think Sam alluded to it earlier, the turnover by Rob Scuderi. Darren Helm scores. What are you three thinking at that moment? Because we talked about how Detroit came on as that period came on. All of a sudden, the Wings at 4-on-4 tie the game. And now all of a sudden, you're back to a 1-1 score with the Penguins playing with the lead all period, but not necessarily playing with the lead in the sense of how they were approaching it. So how did you guys view it at that point?
Well, right after they tied the game in the 4-on-4, Helm getting the goal, and I talked about Helm and Cleary. Cleary had a fantastic scoring opportunity right on the doorstep. He could have made it 2-1 before the buzzer. So the Penguins, I think, if I'm looking at it now, I don't know how I felt at the time. I can't remember, but I can tell you this. It could be 1-1. You'd rather be 1-0, but they could easily have been behind after 20 minutes. So I think it was kind of a victory to be able to have weathered that storm and come out on even terms with a team that had done everything. And, when I look back on it now, I hate to keep bringing this up, but I'm sure Michelle appreciates it. But if you have a team that registers 19 shots on goal and they're missing one of their offensive geniuses, Pavel Datsyuk, and you got to figure if he's in the game, maybe he gets a goal in that sequence. You like to make hay while the sun shines. You're not going to have, 3 periods where you dominate like that and have 19 shots on goal. So that was really where the Red Wings could have taken control of the hockey game. They didn't. And if they had Pavel Datsyuk, maybe he's the difference. Maybe he's a guy who makes that one last great play to give somebody a great scoring chance, or he finishes off one of those opportunities, and the Red Wings are sitting pretty after 20 minutes.
And I think, Josh, going back to your point about it being a tight checking game, it just felt like the Penguins were on the better end of that. I feel like they were, there was a moment where Matt Cook just rammed Nick Lidstrom into the backboards, and Lidstrom gets up and he's got his arms up and he wants a penalty, and they didn't call one. They're playing him really hard. It just felt like the Wings kept almost falling and looking slow, and just, even though they had 19 shots, it just didn't feel like they had their legs under them necessarily. And with the way Marc-Andre Fleury was playing and how he was shutting the door, I don't think any Red Wings fans felt good coming out of that period.
I think
see when they had a quick shot as the camera swung away of Mark Eaton cross-checking Thomas Holmstrom down in the corner. No penalty. They were getting, let's face it, they just weren't calling everything. It's playoff hockey. And normally it's not the Penguins initiating that stuff. It's usually them on the receiving end of those things, which I think was an important factor in why the Penguins, had success. Because I think they were a more physical team, with guys like Matt Cook. And, Mark Eaton was a physical defenseman, and Jordan Staal could play a physical game. And, you had a lot of guys who were willing to pay the price physically and initiate out there. I think when you do that, you have a better chance of winning. You don't want to be the team retaliating in the playoffs. And I thought the Penguins did a good job of initiating physically and wearing down the Red Wings and not putting themselves in a position where they were taking penalties. And by the way, did you hear that stat? They were the 2 least penalized teams in the playoffs to that point. And the fewest number of penalties up to that point in a final in 64 years.
That was wild.
That's a long time. 60. That's older than me. 65, but.
Yeah, to your point, Stag, I think there was a time when Chris Kunitz actually ran Franzen. He got basically a high stick him kind of up in the face, give him a cross check up in the face. Nothing was called. But to your point, Josh, I think what was most disappointing from a Penguins perspective were the 2 goals were kind of self-inflicted wounds. Both Detroit goals. The one, Rob Scuderi has the puck and he's got all the time in the world. No one's even pressuring him. And instead of skating it out and trying to make a move and look for an open lane, he tries to force it because I think Helm took away the wall. So he took his wall play. So he still tried to force it up the middle that gets intercepted and scores. And then on the goal early in the second period that gave Detroit the 2-1 lead, it was the Penguins' own players double screening Marc-Andre Fleury on the shot that ends up going in. So I think from a Penguins perspective, obviously they know Detroit's a very good team. You can't give them those kinds of breaks. You can't make it easy on a team like that. If they're going to get a 2-1 lead, you got to make them earn it. You got to make them really go out there and establish that. But the Penguins gave them 2 kind of easy ones. And I think that was the disappointing facet from the Penguins' perspective. But I still think even down 2-1, you could still see the Penguins were coming and they weren't going to relent because I think they got stronger as that game went on, as that period went on.
Kind Kind of ironic, you guys, that Derry would turn the puck over in that position, as you said, with all that time, because he was on his forehand, and Scuderi played the right side with Hal Gill. He was always on his backhand. And I never saw a guy who could surgically move the puck out of his own end. Like those backhand flips off the glass, he would get him just underneath the top of the glass to get it out. But he was often in a position where he couldn't really make a play. You know, he had to just kind of get it out because he was on his backhand a lot. Now here he is on his forehand with all the time in the world, and he hands it right to the Red Wings. It was just weird to see him do that. But it reminds me, like in football, sometimes you'll see a quarterback, and it almost looks like he has too much time, and he just goes, and he telegraphs the ball right to a defensive back. It's really weird because Scuderi, that was one thing he was pretty good at, was making a good first pass, or at least not making egregious turnovers like that. You saw, I don't know if you saw his reaction too. As soon as the puck went in the net, he knew that he had screwed up.
The camera caught him with some choice words for himself on the bench, if you guys saw.
He did have a huge block though late in the third period that kind of atoned. Yeah, that really kind of atoned for it. We'll get there, but he did atone for that mistake.
Yeah.
Sam mentioned you get a couple of self-inflicted errors on the Penguins' end. First, it's that Helm goal to make it a 1-1 score. Then just 46 seconds into the second period, Brad Stewart, who I feel like I've heard his name more in the last week of watching these replays than in his entire NHL career, no disrespect, he scores 46 seconds in. Kind of also to Staggy's point about, even though the Penguins set the double screen unintentionally on Marc-Andre Fleury there, the Detroit defenseman had a great ability of getting the puck on net, and it just seemed to be, it didn't matter. I mean, obviously you have an unbelievable world-class player at the top of the list in Nick Lidstrom, but all the way down to that third pairing, guys were getting opportunities to have offensive attempts in the attacking zone against the Penguins.
Would you agree, Josh, that just watching the game, the emphasis has always been on blocking shots in the playoffs? Guys will sacrifice their bodies in playoff hockey. But did you get the feeling that there still wasn't as much emphasis on blocking shots even then as there is now? I mean, when I think of how the Penguins blocked shots, for instance, in 2017, it was outrageous. I mean, they were just, guys were falling left and right, from blocking shots. Nick Bonino led all forwards that year in block shots. I mean, it just seemed to me that pucks were getting through that today might not get through, just because teams are that much more focused on blocking shots, and maybe even more they were then.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, especially when you consider that, was it the next year or was it that year that when John Tortorella's shot blocking machine really started to become a thing with New York? I think that really set the tone with guys. Some teams really took to it. Some teams didn't take to it as much, but obviously we know what umbrella Mike Sullivan was under at a certain point in his career. So I think it's worth mentioning that when you talk about how it's kind of evolved throughout the years. But I think it was around that time when Tortorella had that team with Callahan and McDonough, and they just seemed to break an arm or a leg every other week blocking a shot, but they were always putting their body in front of it.
You're right. And by the way, Stewart, that was his second goal of the series. And Doc Emmerich gave a stat. Edzo, one of the two. It was his 9th goal against Pittsburgh in regular season or playoff hockey in his career. I mean,
he was the Anton Strawman before Anton Strawman.
He was.
I agree with your point, Josh, though, about the Red Wings defenseman getting shots through. I remember thinking Nick Cronwall, I mean, he would just tee it up every single time he had the chance, and probably partly because guys weren't blocking shots as much and they felt they had the opportunity to shoot more. But I think, those guys on the Red Wings back end were definitely just going for it every time they had the chance, and Brad Stewart got rewarded there.
How did you guys notice in the course of the second period? Now, Dan Bylsma, again, I mentioned it in game 3, but he was definitely sprinkling Sidney Crosby around. He had him playing between Chatan and Dupuis at one point. I remember Dan Bylsma using Sid more in that capacity than I've seen Mike Sullivan use him since. And that is to say that he would sometimes double shift him on a fourth line, if you will. So that would create a more dangerous fourth line automatically by him having him down there. But also, it was a way of him getting him away from Henrik Zetterberg, I think. So, but Chatan and Dupuis were two skilled hockey players. I mean, Chatan had been a world-class offensive player, and Dupuis developed into one, I think, a really, really good offensive player. And all of a sudden now you've got Sid and Shatan and Dupuis taking the odd shift. It was kind of cool to see that. And it also reminded me that Dupuis was not nearly the factor for the Penguins that he could have been. Dan Bilesman did not play him all that much. I'm not even thinking that he was killing penalties all that much. I mean, Craig Adams was a penalty killer, Matt Cook, Jordan Staal, Max Talbot. I don't remember seeing Dupuis out there very much. Do you?
No, I don't think he was out there. And not the entire playoffs. I feel like Shatan, Sikora, and Dupuis were kind of the three revolving doors. Like,
Yes.
I don't know what the rhyme or reason was at the time, but it seemed like sometimes they'd play, sometimes they wouldn't. I remember, Shatan got sent to the minors too, so that they could make some trade deadline moves to get like Billy Guerin and such. And they made it. They basically came to him and said, "Hey, we're going to send you to Wilkes-Barre because we need to get under the cap. We're going to make these moves, but when the playoffs come, we're going to give you playing time. We're going to get you out there." And so I think sometimes they got him in the lineup as that promise, that they had made to him, particularly in the Cup final. So, and I don't think people speak enough to that, because obviously Miro Shatan came to Pittsburgh thinking he was going to be the Hossa. He was the Hossa replacement. Not that was the player Hossa was, but he was the guy that was going to kind of expected to kind of fill a little bit of that void, and then just didn't have the great season that everybody, I think, was hoping and expecting. And then as things went on, he became kind of the ultimate team player, whatever the team needed, including having to go down because he didn't have that big contract weight. So just him going down to the minors and willing to do that, I think, speaks volumes and of him just wanting to win, and being a team guy and all that. So I think that gets overshadowed too.
That second period, another thing that stood out to me was just throughout the game, really, was what a force Max Talbot was. I mean, he was being used. He was playing with Sid at times. He played with Gino, obviously, and with Fedotenko, but it just seemed like they sprinkled him around too. And he had a history, Max Talbot, of even in junior, of being a guy who elevated his game in the playoffs. And he just lived up to that reputation in this series and in the whole playoff run, but particularly, obviously, in this series, he became a real, almost legendary figure for the Penguins, if you look back on it. And it wasn't just that he scored those big goals. He was just an effective hockey player in all facets of the game. He played good defense. He was a good forechecker. He made good plays. Like, it's just amazing. He just took his game to a whole other level when he got into the playoffs.
Superstar. You guys don't know what that is, but that was a car commercial that he made. Yeah, okay. I didn't know if you guys knew the reference.
Sorry, my dog was really excited about it.
Fair enough. She's excited for the big momentum swing that comes up here in the second period for the Penguins. Am I right, Josh?
Taxi. Calm down. Sorry, I'll mute myself. You guys can continue.
Hey, this is what happens when you record from home in these times, so it's part of it. Yeah, so I think the entire series changed in the next 5 minutes and 37 seconds, which is when the Penguins would score 3 consecutive goals. And but really, you look at the shift of it, because as we kind of touched on, Evgeny Malkin takes a penalty. The Penguins are shorthanded. They're already down 2-1 in the game.
Wait, can we side note really quick too? Because Staggy, how you talked about Gino heading into scrums or whatever, I had to laugh because he gets called and he immediately just starts throwing elbows, starts he's like no hesitation. He just he starts mixing it up because he knows he's going to the box. So he's like, well, I might as well try to take someone with me, and it didn't work. But it's funny that you mentioned that earlier, because I literally made a note of it and laughed about it. Because I'm like, that's just such a Gino thing to do. But sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, no, actually, my puppers decided to make a guest appearance as well. But yeah, so Malkin takes the penalty, and you're already down 2-1. So it's like, oh man, this could be a crucial juncture in the game. As it goes, you're 5 seconds away, 4 seconds away, 3 seconds away, this close to killing the penalty and getting back even strength. And Brooks Orpik takes a penalty. By the way, my favorite thing about Brooks Orpik, never took a penalty he agreed with. It was a clear, just blatant trip, and he gets caught on it. As late as it gets, he still tries to argue with the referee, like, bro, that was a trip. Just goes to
that's word for word what I wrote. I wrote, Brooksy never saw a penalty he agreed with. That was a blatant trip.
Oh no, and it was. It really was. And so now he goes in the box, and all of a sudden you've got a situation where the Penguins are just really in dire straits here, because you just had that big momentum swing too, that you won that penalty kill, and now you got to do it again. So you're staring down the barrel of another 2 minutes, and granted, there's only a 2-second layover on this 5-on-3, so it's basically just really 4 straight minutes of being shorthanded. So you're staring down the barrel of having to do it all over again from scratch, and that's when the big swing comes, Josh, right? Malkin comes out, and
That's when it
I'll let you
happened.
take it from there.
We got 2 Paul Staggerwalls.
Staggerwall is multiplying on the board here.
I think it's fair to say that everyone is anticipating this amazing moment in the final. You got dogs barking, Staggies multiplying, everything's happening here.
The dog can sense it, like when they can, feel like a storm.
That's true. Like they sense storms. They felt storm. You mentioned it, Sam, and we talked about it earlier. First, it's Evgeny Malkin really setting the tone, right? When he had that chance where he came in down the right wing, and I think it was Franzen who was right on top of him there, and they crashed into the end wall. Just that effort, you could feel. They had some great shots of Mellon after that, like a couple like wide shots. I know that was kind of all in the same sequence, but they zoomed out and they had a couple wider angles that you could feel it in the building, and you could see the energy was there and the excitement, anticipation of what potentially could happen. And I give the Penguins a lot of credit because they really were attackers on that penalty kill. They weren't necessarily sitting back and potentially letting Detroit take a 2-goal lead.
Well, what I remember was Max Talbot. You guys might not have me video-wise, but hopefully you have me audio-wise. You hearing me right now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, we just can't see you.
I'm sorry, guys. My laptop, betrayed me for a moment. I was afraid.
Your laptop must be a Red Wings fan.
That didn't happen when I was on my phone, so I'm back on my phone right now. But anyway, Max Talbot was actually, first of all, took the puck to the net. That was the first indication that the Penguins were on the. That's one thing I love about playoff hockey. You see that more in the playoffs than you do in the regular season. As guys in penalty killing situations, forcing the issue and trying to create offense while they're shorthanded. It's awesome. That's why shorthanded goals tend to be scored more in the playoffs. That's why they tend to be huge. Momentum changers, and I think teams actually at times will try to go on the offense more in the playoffs when they're on the penalty kill. And Talbot did it first. He was the first guy to try to take the puck to the net, and then right after that is when Jordan Staal decided to take it to the net.
It was a great play by Talbot to chip it to him too.
Yeah.
Having that awareness, and then Staal really just makes that move around Rafalski, and it's impressive because he already kind of had a half step, and Stahl's not the fastest player, he's not the fleetest of foot. He had some legs, and Rafalski, granted, was at the end of a longer shift, having been out there for some time, so he was a little gassed. But Stahl knew that the perfect way to get around him was just to get the body position and then swoop, just basically block him with his backside. And we've seen Jordan do that so many times throughout his career. We've seen Sid do it so many times. Once they get the angle, they just cut to the net, use their backside as almost blocking a fullback, if you will, to set up that shot. And then from there, he buries the shot on Osgood. And I'll tell you what, I think that was the moment where not only did it ignite the Penguins, but I think that's when the fans were like, this is our year. I think that was the goal. I mean, 2 more will come, but that was the goal where Penguins fans said, this is it. This is our year. We are the better team. I think the fans believed it. The players already kind of felt that way. But I think at that point, the fans, you could just feel it in the building that the Penguins fans knew this was going to be our year.
Especially too, because you think about how Detroit's power play was, surgical, like with their precision, the previous final in 2008, and then they go on to have the best power play in the regular season. Before the Penguins just shut it down. I mean, they didn't allow a shot in those 4 minutes of time there for the Red Wings, and just shut them down so hard. And especially too, it's deflating to see Brian Rafalski and Nick Lidstrom is your top pair. And for them to get, turned inside out like that is.
By the way, did you guys hear Edzo warned about Gino coming out of the box?
I don't recall.
Be careful now, because Gino out of the box, and like 10 seconds later, there came Gino on that semi-breakaway, and when he was, as you said earlier, killing the penalty. So when he came out of the penalty box, so. It was amazing. Edzo, did a really good job there of kind of giving all the fans, the viewers, a heads up about Gino coming out of the box, trying to help the Red Wings, but didn't help.
You talked about the stick. I think Gino once he got in, there was a dump attempt that he literally just kicked away. Not only did he kick it back out, he kicked it past the Red Wing, so he had full speed to get around him to get that chance. And Franz with a great back check to get back and deny him. But yeah, it was the defensive zone again, just reading the play, seeing that this guy was going to go on the wall, and then being able to knock it, not only clear the puck, but knock it past the Red Wing player that whoever it was escapes me now. But just the smart heads up play by Malkin all around.
That's a good point.
The Stahl goal.
And Stahl, it just overwhelmed Rafalski there. I mean, he had no chance of stopping. I mean, with that long reach and just the way his legs were churning, and Rafalski was kind of flat-footed. And, Rafalski was a really good hockey player in his day, but I think that he was kind of mismatched there, if you will, by Stahl, especially when he caught him flat-footed like that. He had no chance of stopping him.
He was mismatched in the 2010 Olympics too against Sidney Crosby there. Poor Brian Rafalski just on the wrong end of a couple goals there that I think Penguins fans will always remember.
How about the special teams of the Penguins? They get a power play, then they get a shorthanded goal, and they keep the Red Wings power play off the board. Just spectacular stuff. And really, to that point in the playoffs, that was the story. The Penguins special teams were phenomenal.
Yeah, Stag, I think that's the big thing also when you look beyond the Stahl goal is that the Red Wings still were on a power play. And I mean, obviously it's easier said than done to turn things back into your favor when you give up a shorthanded goal, you're on the road, everything that comes with that. But the Penguins still had to kill off the rest of that Red Wing power play, and they did. And as Sam mentioned earlier, they didn't even allow a shot on goal. I mean, it was a pretty impressive performance. And I agree with Sam. I feel like when you look at that series, that moment, that 30-second span, 35-second span from Malkin's chance to Stahl's goal. I mean, that was the swing. That was what everyone talks about.
Yeah, because if they go behind, if they don't do that, they're in big trouble maybe. So the game the series could have gone in a completely different direction. So it isn't just that they established momentum for themselves. They took potential momentum away from the Red Wings.
And Staggy, you talked about Dan Bylsma trying to get Sid on different lines. One thing he did like to do was anytime there was a penalty kill, because of the way the lines vary up, he'd like to get that two-headed monster together, Crosby and Malkin together. And that's what he did right after, as Josh said, after Stahl scores, they still got to go out and kill the rest of the penalty. They do that. They get Fedotenko, Malkin, and Crosby out there, the two-headed monster. And, of course, it leads to, Josh?
The next goal. There's more. But just another example, guys, of Evgeny Malkin creating offense for the Penguins, and it's starting in the opposite end of the ice, coming down on that 2-on-1 with Sid. By the way, I had to, I don't know, just a little thing. I'm weird, and I like these little things, but when Sid scored that goal at the side of the net, how many times have we seen that reaction from him where it's just like the hands in real tight, and he gets, and then obviously he doesn't usually get just absolutely railroaded by Chris Letang.
with his mouthpiece kind of hanging out as he's doing the fist pump.
Yeah. Like that's when you know it's a big goal, I feel like, right? When you see him react like that. And obviously we know that, but that was another special play and good patience by the two of them also.
Yeah, especially Malkin, because his initial pass was blocked by Eriksson. And no hesitation, is it because the block came right back to him and he didn't hesitate to get it over there. I mean, he was giving that puck to Sidney Crosby, whether Crosby wanted it or anyone wanted it or not. I bet if it would have got blocked the third time, he would have shot it back over there, because that's how intent he was to get Sid the puck.
I was so excited when Eriksson blocked that initial pass. Like watching it again, just now, I remember I jumped out of my chair like, oh, and then I realized, well, they're going to score here. So, but Josh, going to your point, I mean, can you only imagine how antsy Sid was just sitting on the bench for 4 straight minutes, watching, because obviously he wasn't killing at that particular sequence. And so I think that factors into, for him, and that was his first goal of the series, which is crazy when you think about it. So I think there are so many factors that just accumulated in him having that epic celebration for, what was a huge goal to really just, cement the Penguins' momentum onto their side.
By the first goal of the final, right?
Yes,
it was. I don't know if you guys noticed, but, every time they showed Vladimir and Natalia, like Vladimir's going crazy like a little kid, So then Sid scores and they get a shot of Troy Crosby and he's completely stone-faced. Like he doesn't react at all. And it reminds me that, that's how coaches and GMs are, they never want to show emotion. If you look at Jim Rutherford, or when I look back at Craig Patrick, anytime, or Ray Shero for that matter, anytime a GM, I looked at him after a big goal, like the place would be going absolutely crazy. and the GM doesn't even react. He just has a completely stoned look on his face. That was the same look that Troy Crosby had on his, like he's seen it a million times from his son, but he didn't want to get too excited. I don't know what it is, but I just thought it was interesting. He had no emotion whatsoever on his face after his son had just scored the first goal of the final for him.
I don't think much has changed on either front, right? Between those two.
Well, it's kind of interesting though, because they're kind of the personalities of their fathers too. You said, Troy's very serious, focused, and then obviously Vlad and Gino are both a little more fun, a little more free spirited, a little more emotional, if you will. So it is kind of funny how you see the dad's influence on their sons.
Penguins obviously really poured it on after that goal from Stahl, made it 2-1. 2-2, and then you have the goal from Sid to make it 3-2, and then Tyler Kennedy. We've talked a lot about Max Talbot. We mentioned Jordan Stahl. We talked a little bit about Matt Cook. TK had himself a series at moments too in the Stanley Cup final. Let's talk a little bit about that goal. The third goal for the Penguins in less than 6 minutes, and all of a sudden, I think you kind of felt where the series had swung it before that goal, but you really felt like the Penguins were on pretty solid footing. And what a finish, too, after a pretty sequence that was started by TK on the forecheck.
Yep, another turnover by Rafalski. Tyler Kennedy with really fresh legs, just flying. He had come on the ice on a change. So it was Crosby, Kunitz, and Kennedy on the ice together. Hey, I'll tell you, maybe we don't give enough credit to Dan Bilesma because he made a lot of interesting little subtle changes to his lines and jumping guys on certain times that seemed to just be magical at times. And this was another example of that. Just a beautiful, beautiful play. And, Tyler Kennedy, just by having that energy that he had, I thought had a big influence on that play and then scores the goal.
Yeah, well, if you remember, Orpik pushed it ahead to get out of the zone, and the Penguins were in the middle of a change there. And at that point, Zetterberg, we talked about him being overextended all series long. He was at the end of one of his shifts. And you're right, Tyler Kennedy jumped off the bench. You've got a tired Zetterberg trying to get back against a fresh Kennedy who's just bolting full head of speed, and Kennedy beats him to that puck and gets it to Kunitz, and then the beautiful sequence again. And I think again it kind of looked like the Red Wings were a little tired. They were a little older. They didn't have that extra jump. They didn't have that extra whatever je ne sais quoi that you need. The Penguins did. The Penguins had the younger legs. They were more enthused. They were more amped up, and you kind of saw it all fruition on that play. And one note, I think. Stag, you brought this up in the previous game. We talked about number 3. What stood out to me too was after the goal was scored and they did the announcement. But John Barbaro, I used to, when Tyler Kennedy scored, of course, the Penguins would play that old video of the wrestler, Mr. Kennedy, who would say that was a goal from Tyler Kennedy. And then he'd step off and come back and do Kennedy. And remember, John Barbaro used to imitate that when he would make the announcement. He would Tyler Kennedy. Yeah. And I just loved hearing his voice again. I know we touched on it last time, but hearing him do the Kennedy call was just another, man, you really miss that guy a lot, or at least I do. I know a lot of fans do as well, but that stuck out to me too after that sequence.
Well, I think that there's certain lines that stand out from the different cup wins. I mean, obviously HBK is one that stands out from the 16 run. And I think Cook Stahl Kennedy is a line that, stands the test of time. And obviously, TK wasn't out with his line mates on this shift in particular, but Sam and Saggy, I'm curious for your perspective, because in the years after, I remember whenever Bilesma put them back together, everybody got excited, the fans got amped. What was it about the three of them that worked so well and made them so successful as a trio?
I just think there was the chemistry of, the different ingredients that each of them brought. It was just kind of a perfect combination. What do you think, Sam? I mean, it's.
Well, I think the one thing that they had was they were all very different players. So you had Tyler Kennedy, who was very fast, he was feisty, he had force plays. If you got the puck in deep, he was coming at you at 100 miles an hour, whether you wanted him to or not, and whether it was smart or not. Like, he would always try to force the puck there. And then you had Matt Cook, who was a physical player, kind of a disturber. He obviously, we know his past and his type of play, so he would get under players' skin. And then Jordan Stahl was just a huge body that was really strong and very defensively sound, but the one thing that they did really well was they were able to get into the offensive zone. Once they got there, they would just destroy you. I mean, if Stahl got the puck on the wall, I mean, good luck getting that puck off of him. It's not going to do it. And if they do run out of space, if you do double team a guy like Stahl, he just flips it to a corner, and Tyler Kennedy is going to be the first guy there because his speed so much more than every other guy on the ice. And then they just had this great ability to maintain possession in the offensive zone. And you would see it in sequences too, because they would get the puck, and then you're spending 30 seconds in your zone, and it's taking everything out of you as an opponent just to get the puck out. And as soon as you get the puck out after 30 seconds, you're so taxed, you're going right to the bench, and you have to change. So I think that was a part of the reason too that Dan Bylsma liked to start a lot of games with that trio, because they would establish that offensive zone. They would just wear the opposing teams down early. And I think it was kind of a blend of the three different talents, because while they had kind of the same effect, they were all very different players, and they almost complemented each other perfectly in that sense.
Yeah, and I think they were willing to do that. I mean, they knew what their role was. They didn't. You have a third line. They were proud to be third liners. So they knew that it was their job to get the puck in deep and work down low against the other team's defense. They weren't trying to be fancy. They totally understood their roles, each one of them. And Tyler Kennedy was just having a blast playing alongside Jordan Stahl. I know that. Those two had good chemistry off the ice too. They had thought of themselves as kind of a tandem. And Matt Cook was a guy who created a lot of space because he would really hit people. They knew he was coming. You're right. It was just the fact that they were three different players who all understood their particular roles, and they also understood the role of their line, and they played it to a T.
Ever get a nickname, or were they always just Cook, Stahl, Kennedy?
Cook, Stahl, Kennedy.
It sounds good.
What I think of was their nickname became the best third line in hockey. And they were.
That was also true, yes.
And then you had a guy like Jordan Stahl. I mean, let's face it, he would later fancy himself as a player who should be playing up higher in the lineup. The year that Crosby and Malkin both went down with injury, I mean, he basically established himself as a number one center for a while. He started to think of himself as being more of an offensive player, and he did have 30 goals his rookie year, 7 of them shorthanded, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that so what you saw was Jordan Stahl playing a role that really he might be still to this day more suited for. And even though he fancied himself as more of an offensive guy, I remember Ray Shero saying about Jordan Stahl, you win with guys like Jordan Stahl. And I look back when he was selected in the draft, I mean, they could have taken Jonathan Toews or Nicholas Backstrom, who probably would have fulfilled a role for the Penguins very nicely too. But with Stahl, he was the perfect complement to Malkin and Crosby as a centerman on that third line. So at that point in time, and that point in his career, he was the perfect guy for that role on that Penguins team. I think that was a big reason why he was such a force.
What's interesting too is all these years later in Carolina, he's back as the third line center with Aho and Trocheck.
I was just thinking that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I remember talking to Borky about that one time, Phil Bork, and I said, Jordan Stahl is going to go from the best third line center in the NHL to a mid-range to one of the lesser second line centers in the NHL, and that's kind of how it played out, unfortunately for him. And I think Staggy's absolutely right. Like, he was built to be that third line machine, just the grinder, the puck possession, the offensive zone guy, the defensively responsible guy, can kill penalties, can kind of do those things. And he did score 30 goals while playing. Ironically, he was a winger playing with Evgeny Malkin. So, a lot of guys can score 30 goals with Evgeny Malkin. Not to say that he obviously earned it and deserved it. But, maybe if he had tried switching the wing on a different line, I know Dan Bylsma moved him around from time to time and tried him at wing. And sometimes they moved Gino. He moved Malkin to wing and played with Stahl at center. And it was weird because they never really had that chemistry they did that first year. Stag, I you were there and you really got to see it closely, but those two really hit it off early, and they had that great run that whole season.
I had forgotten that, Sam. That's a really good observation and good memory on your part that he had done that. I think the reason they did that was because they felt like A, they were needed a little bit more strength on the wing, and B, they maybe felt like they were wasting Jordan Stahl as a third line guy during the course of a regular season. But once you get to the playoffs, it's a whole different animal because you're trying to shut down the other team. You want that depth. You want depth scoring. You want matchups, that you can get from having better players deeper down into your lineup. So in that respect, I think his role became more defined in playoff hockey. But, I thought that he had more offense to give. I'll be honest with you. I thought when Carolina made that trade, and I give Jim Rutherford credit. I mean, he saw Jordan Staal as a guy who had more offense in him. I think he honestly believed he was going to be a force offensively, and that's why he made that trade. He really believed it, and it just never came to fruition. A lot of people thought that it just didn't work having him and his brother on the same team. There was some sibling rivalry there, something that just made it so it didn't come to fruition. And, to the Penguins' benefit, they ended up with a good deal in that trade, because they got Brian Dumoulin, obviously, and Sutter, and they were able to get a first-round pick, which unfortunately was Derek Pouliot. But I think, looking back on it, there were a lot of people who thought Jordan Staal had a lot more upside in him offensively, and he got a $7 million a year deal because of that potential, and it never really materialized.
No, it did not. Move forward. That's the beauty of the internet sometimes. There was a little lag there, so I apologize. So our score is 4-2. Penguins are in front. I want to get the gauge again because I feel like that's important to look back at these situations. We talk about the little nuances within the game, the little instances that happen throughout the 20-minute spans of periods, but there's also that feeling that you remember so clearly as a fan, or you remember from covering it, or you just remember from being in the building that night. Where were you guys at feeling-wise through 40 minutes? Penguins just had probably their most impressive period of the entire final right there and going up 4-2, or certainly the most impressive surge with 3 goals in less than 6 minutes. How are you guys feeling at that moment?
Well, you heard Edzo make reference to the building and how loud it was. Kind of reminded me of some, moments back in the 91 and 92 playoff runs when the crowd and the atmosphere and the feeling was one of confidence and belief, and this amazing surge of energy, from the fans, the players providing these great moments that made you really feel like the Penguins were on their way to doing something special. But the best part about it was that you knew that the Penguins were putting themselves in a position to be even in the series and create a best of 3, for the rest of the series. And it was so there was a feeling of elation and relief because you had seen the previous year the Penguins unable to do that. Sam mentioned it at the top of this podcast. This was something the Penguins couldn't achieve the previous year, and they're doing it. And I think we all believed that there was something that could happen now. Whereas we went from a feeling of, man, we can't beat these guys to, hey, I think we can beat these guys.
Yeah, I got to say that it couldn't be more accurate. And from the other side, Edzo called it a house of horrors period for Detroit, and he couldn't have been more accurate. And then just going into that third period, I mean, I think, the Red Wings had a big surge to start, but, going back to what I said earlier about the Wings looking slow and falling down and just not looking like they had their legs. I mean, there's a point where Henrik Zetterberg, he was cutting across the crease, and I don't know if he had contact with Fleury or what, but he just went down and he was really slow to get up. And it was just an overall tough game for him, going back to that turnover on Kennedy's goal. And, and he's the guy with Datsyuk out that you're looking to be the guy. And, with him just in that body language, just looked like he was fatigued. You're not feeling good from the Red Wings perspective. And I think, I feel like the Penguins could probably sense that. Like you said, Staggy, they could sense they had that belief, they had that confidence, whereas it was definitely, I think, going the other way for the Red Wings.
What I loved most about that third period was the Penguins kept coming. They didn't take their foot off the gas. They didn't sit back and try to protect a 4-2 lead. And they kept coming and coming. And there was a point, I think Staggy mentioned it earlier, where Max Talbot had a couple great opportunities. There was about 8 minutes left in the game. So it's getting close to the end. There's about 8 minutes left, and Max Talbot gets a couple great opportunities. And the noise in the building lifted at such a decibel. And I think literally for the entire final 8 minutes, it stayed kind of at that point because the fans could sense that this win was coming, that the Penguins were going to pull this off. And other than, and again, the Penguins played so well defensively in that third period. I think Filppula had a great chance with about 3 minutes left. But other than that,
that was an unbelievable chance. I don't know if you remember, guys. I'm watching the game. I'm going, can I see a replay of that? Can I see a replay, please? No replay. They never showed a replay of the save Fleury made on Filppula, and I could tell in Edzo's voice, because I know what it's like. You're in the booth, and he's probably begging for the replay to his producer, and it never came. We never saw another look at what was like gigantic save in that hockey game on Valtteri Filppula, because he was right on the doorstep. The play was set up from below the goal line, and Fleury really had to be sharp on that one. That was like the key save that prevented the Red Wings from getting any life, because if they get that goal, there's still a few minutes to go in the game. Now, you're biting your nails because they're down by only one.
Yeah, and I think that was the Red Wings' last gasp, because that was their last great opportunity. It was 3 minutes left. And then the funny thing that kind of stood out to me too, I don't know if this stood out to you guys, but even though Detroit ended up taking the penalty, so they were shorthanded anyway, they never pulled Chris Osgood. And there was a point where there was 50 seconds left and they had it in the offensive zone, and Osgood never went to the bench. And I don't know if the bench never called him, if they didn't hear him, what happened there, but it almost was a telling tale, whereas it seemed like the Red Wings were just throwing in the white towel. Like they were just, all right, there might be a minute left, but this game's over. We're just going to pack it up, go back to Detroit, try to get one in Detroit, see how it goes from there. But I don't know, that really stood out to me. And again, it might have just been happenstance. Maybe they just were folding the tents and saying, all right, let's try to take care of business back home in Game 5. But you'd think in a Stanley Cup final game, you're going to throw everything out there that you can. So I was really surprised that they never got Osgood off the ice and got even though it would have just made it 5-on-5 because they were shorthanded, but at least give yourself a fighting chance.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Stag.
Go ahead, Josh.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned that they didn't take their foot off the gas, but at the same time, I really was impressed with the Penguins' defensive posture, if you will, in the game. They were doing a really good job structurally of making sure that they weren't, on the wrong side of the puck. And if what I remember distinctly about the Red Wings the previous year, there was never a moment on the TV screen where you didn't see all 5 jerseys. It was uncanny the way they played, like a tight knit style everywhere, all 3 zones. And I thought the Penguins it turned into one of those teams right before our eyes. They started to become much better at being on the right side of the puck and not allowing the Red Wings to get any great chances, except for that Filppula chance that stands out. And I thought, again, Helm and Cleary actually were still dangerous in that third period. But the Penguins, without going into a shell, were still in a good defensive posture and able to, vanquish the Red Wings in that third period.
Sam mentioned this in the very beginning. I think we can bring it full circle by saying this now, that with that win, the script was flipped from 2008 to 2009 in the sense that the Penguins held serve on home ice. Now, we're not going to dive into Game 5. We'll do that ahead of Game 6. But from where they were at that point in the series, that kind of a game, I remember from a different side of the state thinking, oh, no. Because you could kind of see where it was going. But you guys have hit on it plenty of times that you also felt the same way for different reasons.
I did. I mean, I think we all did. The only thing that was hanging over us was this, you can't beat the Red Wings in Detroit stuff. You know what I mean? We come into Detroit and win a game here. And so, you're going into Game 5 hoping that's finally going to happen. You feel like you've gotten some momentum on your home ice, and this is your chance to now go in there and win a game. And then, we know what we'll talk about what happened next in our next podcast. But couple things. I had totally forgotten that games 1 and 2 were played back to back. You heard Doc Emmerich mention 4 games in 6 nights. These are things that I had forgotten, and I think one of the reasons why it's important is because we talked about the Red Wings being tired. I thought that having to play game 2 in a back-to-back situation for the Penguins was not good, because they didn't have time to kind of have that day in between to get their bearings and be ready for that next game. And the Red Wings were able to take both of the first 2 games. And then, 4 games in 6 nights is significant. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. That doesn't happen too often in the Stanley Cup final. I think it's dumb, actually, but I do. I mean, why when you're playing your most important games of the year where you have the national audience, would you put teams in that position? But that's what they did.
All right.
All right.
I think that about wraps it up, huh?
I'm looking for
One thing
talking about.
There's another thing I thought of during the game. I just wanted to point this out. I don't know if you guys remember, but when they would get shots of the Detroit bench, and Michelle, you certainly know this, you would see their assistant coach, Brad McCrimmon, and he would later perish in that horrible plane crash with the Yaroslavl team in Russia. He was their coach. So when I saw that, that immediately came rushing back to me, that he was the assistant coach to Mike Babcock, later became the head coach of that Yaroslavl team. And I just thought I'd point that out. It was just something that struck me as I was watching the telecast.
Yeah, it was crazy. And kind of not to go off on too big of a tangent, but to your point on that, Stag, they had some re-airs and replays of some of the stuff from the 2010 Olympics, and just seeing, Pavel Demitra and some other players on the ice in those Olympic games, it kind of was eerie to watch them. So.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to mention that because he was a really good player. He was obviously a guy who was probably destined to be a head coach in the National Hockey League someday. It's just I don't like to put a damper on things, but I just thought, I wanted to give him his props too, as a guy who was, probably an important member of their staff, and just seeing him on that bench just made me kind of feel sad. And I don't know if anybody else noticed that, but I noticed it during the game.
Mike Babcock had a pretty impressive coaching tree. Those people were all hands on deck to get ready for game number 5 back in Detroit as this series shifted back to Motown and Michelle's friendly confines after the Penguins held serve, winning the second 2 games in Pittsburgh. Louis the Beagle making an appearance. He's ready to see what happens. We're going to pretend like we don't know what happens. And we're so excited to go into Joe Louis Arena game 5 and, of course, recap that and game number 6 with you when we talk to you next. I want to make sure I'm right on this, guys. Next week, right? We'll be giving you game 6. Okay. So that's when you'll catch the next episode of the Scoop Rewind presented by PPG. In the meantime, I want to thank Paul Staggerwald, Michelle Crecchiola, Sam Kassan, and Louis the Beagle. I'm Josh Getzoff. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next week as we look back on game number 6.
Boy.